Hello and welcome to another MG316 satellite tutorial on Big Blue Button. And in today's class, we are going to look at employment relations in Japan. Over the last 2 weeks, we have been looking at employment relations in UK and in USA. And in this week, we are going to look at Japan, and you will see when you compare UK USA with Japan that Japan is quite different from the Western countries the two Western countries that we have studied so far. So let's look at our outline. Some key themes. We will look at the context. We will look at the Japanese model, quite different from the Western model. We will look at union growth, trade union growth, and their decline. Japan is not immune to what we have seen in UK and USA, the trade union density decline. The end of lifetime employment, we pose a question, or a question is posed. Employers and their associations, collective bargaining. Then we will look at some of the current issues in Japan. And finally, we will conclude. So some key themes. First of all, we are going to look at the Japanese model of lifetime employment, seniority with merit-based pay, and enterprise unionism has been under pressure in recent years. Now, what is this Japanese model? We will look at the Japanese model in depth in this satellite tutorial. Key changes include the growth of overseas activities by Japanese multinational companies, the deregulation of corporate laws, and the rise of non-standard employment. Contemporary Japanese employment relations are relatively stable, and relations between labor and management are generally cooperative, but the number of individual labor disputes is growing. This is because the trade unions are declining. There is an increase in individual bargaining, and hence an increase in the number of individual disputes. The union membership is declining, and a range of social, economic, and labor trends pose challenges to the future of unions. The growth of non-regular employment has been linked to increasing inequality and poverty, and raises questions about how to protect the employment and working conditions of atypical workers who are not represented by trade union. Non-regular employment is those jobs which are not permanent, those casual employment or part-timers on fixed term contract. These are non-regular employment. And atypical workers are the not so typical workers. Who are the typical workers? Those on permanent employment. Atypical workers are those on part-time work, on casual employment, on fixed term contracts, or they are seasonal workers or agency workers. These are atypical workers, and they are not usually represented by trade unions. Employment relations context. So Japan is one of the largest economies in the world. It has a labor force of around 66 million, and in 2012 it had a labor force participation rate of 74%. The declining fertility rate and aging population are major issues for future. Not just future, even Japan is facing this problem now. The declining fertility rate and aging population problem. Japan's unemployment rates were among the lowest in the world until the 1990s. After having reached 5.4% in 2002, the rate went down to 4% in 2013. So Japan has this major problem of aging population. What a country wants is that it should have most of its population in the middle range, and should be in the where the working people are, probably from 20s to around 40s or 50s, closer to their 50s. But in Japan, what has happened is more people are retiring compared to the number of young workers joining the workforce. So that is the aging population problem in Japan. Moving on, politics are dominated by the conservative Labour Democratic Party, a Liberal Democratic Party, sorry, not Labour. Japan does not have a Labour political party. It has a Liberal Democratic Party and a Social Democratic Party, LDP and SDP. And most of the time, the LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, has been in power. Even now, is in power. And before the Prime Minister was Shinzo Abe, the current Prime Minister that just came into power this September is Yoshihide Suga. I believe I hope I'm pronouncing his name correct. Yoshihide Suga is the name. You can Google it, get the spelling right. Don't worry about the pronunciation. So after the dismissal interlude of the Social Democratic Party, the government of Shinzo Abe was the leader of LDP. Currently, the uh, Yoshihide Suga is the leader of LDP. Please note that LDP is the political party which supports the employers. It is not a left-wing political party. It is a right-wing political party. The left wing supports the workers. The right wing supports the employers, the business people. So LDP is the conservative LDP supports the businesses. So the government of Shinzo Abe pursues an aggressive monetary policy in order to stimulate the economy and to stop the deflationary trend which has been at work for the last 2 decades. Unions are generally considered close to the SDP, Social Democratic Party, but they have little influence on members' voting decisions. So again, note just like USA, Japan also does not have a Labour political party. There are just two major political parties present in Japan, the LDP and the SDP, and majority of the time the LDP been in power, and even now the Liberal Democratic Party is in power in Japan. I think they have the elections, they're scheduled to have the elections in 2021. That's next year. So the Japanese model, let's have a look at the Japanese model. The Japanese model of employment relations is based on operative labor relations between employers and unions at the enterprise level and long-term employment relations. It was gradually shaped in the 1950s and 60s after a period of strife following the democratization of Japan under the Allied Powers of General Headquarters 1945 to 51. This model is believed to have contributed to Japan's solid economic performance in the 1970s and 80s. The model is under pressure due to the growth of overseas activities by Japanese enterprises and the decline of union density. So this Japanese model is based on operative labor relations, and there is operation. The Japanese model has been said to be a dancing approach towards employment relations. dancing approach basically is whereby the two parties, which is the employers and the workers, or the representatives of the workers, which are unions, they cooperate with each other instead of being standing against each other. So there is mutual cooperation between these two parties. And in Japan, it happens at the enterprise level. At the enterprise level means at the organization level. We did discuss these levels when we discussed UK and USA, that collective bargaining happens at enterprise level or at industry level. And in UK, we saw that collective bargaining mostly took place at the industry level, which was centralized. However, it was shifting away towards enterprise level, decentralization of collective bargaining. However, in USA, we saw that majority of the collective bargaining was taking place at the enterprise level or at the plant level. So the collective bargaining was already decentralized. However, we can see in Japan, it's somewhat similar to USA, that it's happening at a decentralized level, at the enterprise level, that is, but it does not go further into plant level bargaining and things like that. So there is mutual cooperation between the management and the workers at the enterprise level, that is the organizational level. Union growth and decline. The freedom of association was recognized after the Second World War. The Trade Union Law of 1947, that replaced that of 1945. The labor movement was rebuilt very quickly, and the density peaked in 1947 at 56%. After that, decline. So after the 1970s, membership and density stagnated and then steadily declined. Union density in 2013 was 17.7%. So just like UK, just like USA, trade union density in Japan is currently declining for the last 20, 30 years now. And this is a usual trend, as I've said, as we are going to see a number of countries after Japan. We are going to look at Germany, Sweden, Australia, and finally New Zealand. You will see that in all these countries, the trade union density is now declining ever since the 1980s. So, what are some of the reasons for this trade union density decline in Japan? There have been changes in the industrial structure, especially the shift towards the service sector, changing attitudes towards labor unions, and finally a steady increase in atypical workers who are not organized by Japanese unions. Now, we have seen that in all the countries, or in most of the countries, the first unions to organize were the craft unions, even in Japan. And this is from the manufacturing industry, the manufacturing sector. And the unions in the manufacturing sector are strong. But now the world is shifting towards the service sector, the service industry, and the unions are not that strong, or not very strong in the service industry in most of the countries, and hence unions are weak in this industry, in the service industry, and as a result, the workers, they do not want to join these unions. The attitude of the employers is also leading to the trade union density decline. And also, there has been an increase in atypical workers. I just explained what atypical workers are. Those not in the normal employment. They are part-time workers or casual employees, sorry. They are seasonal workers or agency workers. These are atypical workers. And these workers are not usually organized by any Japanese unions. So the unions, they maybe they are not allowed to join unions, or they cannot join unions, because remember, when you join unions, you have to pay a fee to become a union member. So these are some of the reasons as to why there is a decline in union density in Japan. Moving on, lifetime employment. So regular employees have become more concerned about the competitive position of the companies for which they work, and most of them seem to have a high degree of commitment to the enterprise. Companies only recruit new school leavers or graduates and train them with the expectation that they will conform to the company's norms and remain committed to the enterprise. This means that those employees who voluntarily quit the company in mid career would face a considerable reduction of their wage and poor career opportunity. Performance management practices encourage long term employment in the same firm. Lifetime employment generally applies to men, not women. Employees are expected to stay in the same company until their mandatory retirement age, usually 60 years, but a 2005 legislation stipulates that workers should be offered employment up to 65 years. So, lifetime employment is something unique in Japan. We have not seen this in UK or in USA, right? And lifetime employment is something that applies to Japanese males. The women's are excluded. The immigrant workers are also excluded from lifetime employment. So what has happened is that it is only offered to Japanese male, and the performance management is also practiced in such a way that it encourages long-term employment in the same firm. Now, what these organizations do is they recruit the new school leavers or graduates, and then they train them, and then they these uh, expect these new graduates or school leavers to stay in the firm until their retirement. So they structure the reward system as well as such. So the older you are and the longer you have been working for a company, the higher chances of you getting a bonus and promotion and wage increase. That's how lifetime employment works in Japan. But again, note that lifetime employment generally applies to Japanese men only. Women are usually excluded from this. Enterprise unionism is the basic form of labor unions. Enterprise unions consist solely of regular employees of a single company, regardless of their occupational status, up to the lower levels of management. If you leave the firm, then you leave the union. That's what enterprise unions are. Enterprise unions are that comprise of just uh, workers from a single organization. The primary core of regular employees in the public sector and large enterprises constitutes only about one third of all employees. The other two thirds work for small and medium enterprises, SMEs, or on a temporary or part time basis and are often not union members. They're usually not allowed to join. So, atypical workers that we have seen, they are usually not allowed to join the unions, and hence they are not union members. As most part time workers are women, hence women are excluded from the lifetime employment, because they are usually part time workers. Union density among women is much lower than among men. So part-time workers are also not allowed to join unions, and women are most of these part-time workers. Hence, the union density among women is lower compared to men. Rengo, what is Rengo? In 1988, Rengo is the largest confederation and has pursued cooperative labor management relations. However, it has found it is difficult to represent the interest of union members at grassroots level. So, what is Rengo? Rengo is the umbrella body of trade union present in Japan, like what we have seen in USA and UK. In UK, the umbrella body of trade union was TUC, and in America, it was AFL-CIO. Just like that, Rengo is the umbrella body of trade union present in Japan. Most union activities occur at the enterprise level. The reason for this is because there are more enterprise unions present in Japan, and enterprise unions are financially independent. A small part of union fees is levied to industrial federations and to Rengo. The relationship between unions and management is based on trust and mutual benefit, and employees support management initiatives to enhance the competitiveness of the firm. Pay differentials between managers and lower rank staff are small, and senior staff are promoted internally from the ranks, encouraging employee identification with the enterprise. And again, as I said, that their promotions are structured in such a way that promotes a lifetime employment. So senior staff are usually promoted internally from the ranks. The advantage of enterprise unionism is that policies are adapted to each enterprise rather than the sector or an ideology. The advantage of enterprise unionism is that every organization, looking at its own environment, can negotiate an agreement with the union. With the industrial collective bargaining, what happens is that a particular industry sets the all the agreements, all the conditions in the collective agreement is based on an industry, regardless of the firm type, regardless of the firm that you are, whether you are a small firm or you are a medium or a large enterprise. Everyone in that industry has to follow that same agreement, but not with enterprise bargaining. With enterprise bargaining, one agreement for one organization. So it's a custom made agreement to each organization. That's the advantage of enterprise unionism. Critics of enterprise unionism suggest that by only focusing on co workers of large firms, it discriminates against non co workers who are often more vulnerable and likely to be women. So the enterprise unionism has its downfall as well, such that the unions usually only focus on the issues of the co-workers of the firm and not the non-co-workers who are more vulnerable. Next is we look at employers and their organizations, or employers and employer organizations. Many violent labor disputes occurred immediately after the Second World War because of economic hardships and the shortage of material necessities. To restore managerial authority, Nichiren, the Japanese or the Japan Federation of Employees Association, was founded in 1948. Nichiren, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Nichiren was the umbrella body of employer association in Japan. Just like in UK, the CBI, Confederation of British Industry, is the umbrella body of employers association. Likewise, in Japan, Nichiren was the umbrella body of employee association. Currently, Nichiren is no longer there. It has combined with Keden Ren. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, to form the new umbrella body of employee association called Nippon Keidanren, and these are Japanese names. The English translation is Japan Business Federation. So Nikkeiren had important functions until the 1990s, and it merged with another large organization, Keidanren, in 2002 to form Nippon Keidanren, which is the Japan Business Federation. So the current umbrella body of employer association is Nippon Keidanren. Nippon Keidanren coordinates and publicizes employers' opinions on labor problems, selects representatives to government commissions and ILO delegations, and provides services to member organizations. So these are some of the things that the umbrella body of employer association does. Just a reminder that USA does not have an umbrella body for employers association. So each year at the time of Shunto, there is the spring labor offensive. Shunto is a season, the spring season. Nippon Kaizen assists employers in dealing with unions' demands during collective bargaining. So it is the time of Shunto during which collective bargaining takes place in Japan. Three factors influence the magnitude of Shunto, and these are the demand and supply conditions in the labor markets, consumer price level, and business conditions. Employers have increased their control over employees in recent years, and UK and USA is no different. So Japan is following suit. Moving on, we look at collective bargaining and industrial disputes. Distinguishing features of CB in Japan are collective bargaining takes place at the level of enterprise only, unlike what we have seen in UK, which happens at the centralized level, at the industry level. However, it is shifting away towards enterprise level. But in USA, it's taking place at the enterprise level and at the plant level. But in Japan, collective bargaining takes place at the enterprise level. In most unionized enterprises, there are elaborate joint consultation mechanisms in which unions participate. Collective bargaining focuses on pay issues, particularly during the Shunto Spring Wage Round. Pay agreements may be concluded separately from the agreements on other issues. Agreements are almost always reached without strikes or lockouts. Recent industrial disputes have practically disappeared in recent years. So these are some of the features of collective bargaining in Japan. Takes place at the enterprise level. There is cooperation from both the parties, right? More focus is given on pay, and pay can be concluded separately from all the other agreements, and it mostly happens, or it happens during the Shunto spring wage round. So it's during the spring season, and happens almost on an yearly basis, isn't it? And these agreements are almost always reached without any strikes or lockouts. So in recent years, industrial disputes have practically disappeared. There hasn't been much disagreements. Continuing with the collective bargaining and industrial disputes, grievances are often settled informally, and formal procedures are rarely used. This is very common in Japan that grievances are usually settled informally. What happens is that when there are disagreements or any grievances, the workers and the management, they sit down and they talk and they talk and talk and talk and until the matter gets resolved. So really, the formal procedures of resolving grievance are used, because remember, there is a cooperation, there is a dancing approach towards employment relations in Japan. There is cooperation between employers and the workers, or the representatives of these workers, which are unions. Disputes are usually settled directly between the parties concerned, but sometimes a third party, the central or local labor relations commissions, is called upon for conciliation. So sometimes a third party is involved. Since the 1990s, individual disputes have been clearly on the rise. To deal with individual cases, a labor tribunal was created in 2006 together with new administrative services. So since the 1990s, this is because the trade union density has been declining, so less and less workers are members of the trade unions, and most of these workers are negotiating their own contracts. So individual disputes have been on the rise. Current issues, we have quite a number of current issues to discuss in Japan, so let's look at those. After the long recession of the 1990s, a slow economic recovery was driven mainly by exports in the manufacturing sector. The financial crisis of 2008 hit the sector hard. In 2001, huge earthquakes followed by a tsunami struck the northern regions of Japan and devastated the Fukushima nuclear power station. This created a large number of displaced people. Most Japan large Japanese firms invested in overseas subsidiaries so that many of them become multinational enterprises with their headquarters in Japan. And a similar trend is present in America as well, isn't it? There are a lot of American firms that have invested overseas and they are now multinational corporations. The international context surrounding Japan has changed since the 1980s. Korea and Taiwan have become strong competitors in many high tech industries. Chinese markets are of crucial importance for many Japanese multinationals. Long term problems in Japan's social and economic context are associated with domestic trends, in particular problem, the aging population problem, declining fertility rates, and increased female participation in the labor force. We have looked at these problems and issues in Japan, isn't it? The aging population problem and the declining fertility rates. Labor market deregulation. Successive governments have subscribed to the ideologies of free markets and have deregulated market institutions. In recent years, a drastic change in corporate law has helped many firms to reorganize themselves through mergers and acquisitions. Although most top managers are still attached to the model of stakeholders, the balance of power between shareholders and employees is changing due to the deregulation of corporate laws. Several labor laws have facilitated the use of temporary agency workers. Agency workers, they are atypical workers. These workers are mostly women and young. They're paid much less than regular workers. So there is a labor market deregulation taking place in Japan. Long-term employment. Long-term employment is the cornerstone of human resource management in large Japanese firms. Lifetime employment, seniority-based pay, internal promotions up to the top management, and the linking of directors' pay levels to employees' pay levels are the main features of this traditional employment model. This is the what the Japanese model is all about. Lifetime employment and senior-based pay and promotions. The notion of the family as a community is deeply rooted in Japan. So they treat the firm as a family or as a community. The notion of the firm as a community is deeply rooted. So everyone working in a particular organization is treated as family or is treated as part of the community. Long-term employment practices have been under pressure since the 1990s downturn. Large firms have reduced their intake of new recruits and have increased recruitment of non-regular workers and outsourcing. The average length of service of regular workers has not been affected. However, there has probably been a drop in the number of people with the long-term employment status. So we can see that the lifetime employment is actually declining in Japan. Moving on, growth of atypical employment. In recent years, there has been a steady increase in atypical employment, and this is common with UK and USA as well. There has been an increase in more atypical workers, more casual, more part-timers, more seasonal, more agency workers. So there has been a steady increase in atypical employment, covering part-time workers, fixed-term workers, and temporary workers. Today, nearly 40% of employees are in non-standard employment. Non-regular workers typically do not have job security. So these atypical workers, they usually do not have job security. Most firms are using non-regular workers to reduce their labor cost and to adjust to changes in the business cycle. A serious issue with this practice is a large wage differential between regular workers and non-regular workers, pushing the latter into working poor. There is a lack of pathways from atypical to regular employment. Long working time. Now, long working time is a serious issue. Annual working time per full-time employee has remained at high levels. Overtime work is largely practiced, in part due to lack of penalty for excessive overtime work. Some overtime work is not even recorded by the organizations, and therefore they are not paid. So these Japanese workers, they work long hours, and at times these overtime work is not even recorded and they are not even paid. As there is no custom of long vacation, Japanese workers tend to take only half of the paid annual holidays to which they are entitled. So they don't go on long vacations, like what we see in the Western countries, what we have seen in UK and USA. It's not present here in Japan. Finally, to conclude, since the 1990s, the context in which employment relations are placed has undergone considerable changes. Firstly, the relative position of Japan vis-a-vis China and other neighboring nations has changed greatly. Due to the slumping Japanese economy in contrast to the phenomenal economic growth of China, Japanese enterprises had to develop overseas activities at the expense of domestic employment. So when Japanese firms they move overseas, the jobs in Japan they are they going to the people that used to work they are displaced usually. Yeah? Within Japan, most employment creation has been in the service sector, in particular in retail or health and welfare. The growth of atypical employment is associated with a cost reduction effort in the manufacturing and the trend towards a service economy. And this is a worldwide trend, that there is growth of atypical employment, and this is to reduce cost, and a decline in the manufacturing sector and a trend towards a service economy. Young people are overworked as a result of recruitment cutbacks. Yet, on the other hand, many service sector companies are employing mainly part-time or fixed-term workers. So these are not typical workers. They are part-time workers or fixed-term workers. The social norm of lifetime employment is being eroded, so declining in lifetime employment, given the limited coverage of unions, the lack of employees' ability to voice problems is also a source of concern. So this concludes employment relations in Japan. So we have seen that the Japanese employment relations is quite different from what we have seen in UK and USA. However, they do share some similarities, like enterprise unionism is there in America and likewise in Japan, isn't it? So next week is mid-semester break, I believe. So after next week, we are going to continue with the employment relations in Germany. If you have any questions, any queries, again, please feel free to send me an email, which is my email address is already up there on Moodle. And again, a copy of this recording will be posted up on YouTube. If you are or if you believe that big blue button is not clear, YouTube should be fine. All right, so see you in the next satellite tutorial for employment relations in Germany. Thank you all.